People may sometimes wonder, why is it that Pakistan, which is one third the size of India, occupies so much of our mind space and attention, and whether India should just treat that country as a nuisance, and whether it must just treat it as an irritant and forget it and move on. I believe that it would be a fallacy, it would be a serious mistake on our part to ignore this particular problem, because I believe that the very foundations of Pakistan are based on India hatred and specifically Hindu hatred, which effectively means that whoever subscribes to the idea of Pakistan, regardless of which country or which geography they live in, effectively has the germ or seed of Hindu hatred as part of his mindset. And that is not good for the harmony of this country under any circumstances. Since, as on date, we are told that Hindus are about 80% of the Indian population. I don't know if that figure is still true, and I'd wait for the next census to tell me if we have come down to 75% or 76%. Be that as it may, even if you're 75%, I do believe that it is important to understand the foundations of this concept called Pakistan, this idea of Pakistan, and what is it built on, because it has a serious relevance and implication for us as a country. I don't think we should trace the origins of this issue to 1947 or 1946 or the Lahore Resolution. Perhaps I think it makes it imperative to trace this entire thing to the partition of Bengal in 1905 by Lord Curzon, because I think the seeds of the concept of Pakistan and the reality of Pakistan were sown in 1905 and not in the 1940s or the 1930s. That's my reading. There's a decent chance that it may have existed even before. I am saying at the very least, the cutoff date must be pushed from 1947 or 1946 to 1905. That's where I think you must start looking at a significant amount of documents to understand what is the basis of this entire idea. Why did someone feel the need to secede from India and to create a separate country? What was the problem in living in a Hindu majority India? These are certain uncomfortable but certainly relevant questions that need to be asked and answered. Now, as part of his book, the one thing that Dr. Ambedkar starts off with, I think in the first few paragraphs or the first few chapters, is asking himself, what is the definition of a nation? What constitutes a nation? What makes a nation? And he strikes a very clear and perhaps an obvious distinction between a nation and a country. A country is perhaps a landmass which gives you the field of work, but a nation effectively exists in the head, which is whether you think of yourself as one people, whether you worship the same set of people, are there any shared set of values that you as a people share and believe in and practice? Um, Unfortunately, Dr. Ambedkar arrives at the conclusion that it is foolhardy and perhaps stupid and ignorant on the part of Hindus to not accept the reality of Pakistan and the two nation theory, which is to say that he believed that uh, Hindus and Muslims, at least Muslims who wanted the state of Pakistan, and Hindus are not a single nation because they don't worship the same set of heroes. Their ideas of who is a hero, who is an invader, who is a savior, and who is not uh, are completely different, and not just different, they are at loggerheads with each other. The hero of one is the villain for the other. So let me give you perhaps a more provocative example to make this point. A lot of people believe that Aurangzeb was a wali for the Muslim community, which is to say someone who is seen as the defender of the faith or the protector of the faith or the preserver of the faith. Whereas if you ask a good cross section of Hindus, they would certainly disagree with that point of view, because if he was a protector of faith, then effectively he pits his own faith against the Hindu faith and Hindus. If he was a protector of a faith which he himself had created and has no basis in the scripture of that faith itself, then it was his own fanaticism and bigotry which was put on stark display. So effectively, you see that there are any number of heroes worshipped by this particular cross section of people who subscribe to the idea of Pakistan, which pits them at loggerheads with the Hindu society. Okay, so that's precisely why he said that whether Hindus like it or not, whether the Congress likes it or not, there is no other option but to accept that the idea of Pakistan is a reality, and that fundamentally these two communities are incapable of living with each other. That is his position. That's not my position. Um, I do believe that the future will tell us whether he was right or wrong, but at the very least, for those people, for those Muslims who subscribe to the idea of Pakistan, who ultimately migrated to that particular country, whatever he said seems to have been right. With respect to Pakistan, the one thing that Dr. Ambedkar also says, and this is perhaps the more sensitive aspect of the book, is that for India to protect itself from the traditional hostility that it has faced from its northwestern frontier on since time immemorial, it must ensure that it develops an army of its own with a lot more Hindus in the army and its armed forces. This is Dr. Ambedkar's statement as part of his book. By the way, it's not my statement, and I'm not paraphrasing or twisting or contorting his words. He says this exactly in the manner I'm saying, which is to say, or at least the spirit in which I'm putting it, which is to say that if India has to survive as an independent nation, one, it must have an army of its own. There, he clearly disagrees with the Gandhian approach, where he even questioned the relevance of an army, or even Nehruvian approach for that particular matter. Second, he is blunt in his point of view that the army that India puts together must be primarily an army of Hindus, and that Hindus must start sending their children to the army so that they can learn to wield the weapon. This is something that he says very, very starkly. So, why is this important? Is that contrary to Gandhian pacifism, uh, Dr. Ambedkar's very, very real and pragmatic view of the need for state power, of the need for an armed force, of the need for, let's say, sanctioned and justified use of force, not violence, is something that he subscribed to. Which is why, while Mr. Gandhi may be an idealist, and I don't think he was an idealist for that particular matter, there is not a better realist to be found than Dr. Ambedkar on this particular issue. And there's a decent chance that he was even more candid than Mr. Patel, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, on the issue of Pakistan. Because while Mr. Patel had his own views and was a man of his own mind, ultimately he had to bow down to the wishes of Mr. Gandhi. Uh, the best part of Dr. Ambedkar is his irreverence to Mr. Gandhi, which effectively allowed him to speak his mind regardless of the consequences and regardless of how unpopular it made him among his own people. The other thing that Dr. Ambedkar also says is at some stage, uh, we must accept the reality that the mindset that subscribes to the concept of Pakistan will never ever reconcile itself to the idea of living in a Hindu majority India, because it believes that it has ruled over this particular subcontinent for close to 800 years, whether or not that is the truth, but at least for a period of 800 years in the aggregate, if not for a continuous period of 800 years. And therefore, they would always proceed on the assumption that those people who have been treated as slaves and as second grade citizens cannot be allowed to rule them again. And that seems to be the point of view that Dr. Ambedkar captures with a lot of clarity. How is this relevant to modern India? Perhaps you must connect these points that Dr. Ambedkar presents with the statements frequently made by Asaduddin Owaisi as well as Akbaruddin Owaisi. Not the statements that they make before the English media, not the statements that they make before NDTV or national media, but the statements that they make in front of their home audience, either in Aurangabad or Adilabad or Charminar or any other place where they call these meetings as jalsas. And there you get to actually see the sense in which they say that this country belongs to us. They don't say that they belong to this country, they say that this country belongs to them. That has a very different connotation altogether. And if anybody were to read up on the history of the All India Majlis-e-Ittihad al-Muslimin as a party and its antecedents, what is it that they mean becomes very, very clear. I don't think it's a statement of patriotism, it's a statement of ownership of a very different nature altogether. Dr. Ambedkar also says that the treatment of Muslims within the community and the treatment of non Muslims or the interaction with non Muslims are entirely different. And perhaps it has some basis or it has some connection to the idea of the two nation theory. So, effectively, Dr. Ambedkar, I think, doesn't mince words in making the statement that if these two people who have such very different notions of a nation very different notions of the past, very different notions of the present, and very different notions of the future, if they live under the same roof, it is bound to lead to frequent bloodletting. It is bound to lead to frequent, let's say, civil wars, and that seems to be his prognosis. So I asked myself, assume for a moment if I were to present this point of view as an independent point of view, perhaps in a JNU or a Jamia or an Aligarh Muslim University or elsewhere, there's a decent chance that I may be branded a bigot or a fundamentalist. But why is it that these opinions of Dr. Ambedkar are not pointed out enough? Why is it that they are not showcased enough? Why is it that some people seem to be so uncomfortable when these points of view of Dr. Ambedkar are presented to them, or they're confronted with these ideas of Dr. Ambedkar? Then what does it do to the so-called Dalit-Muslim unity is something that I'd certainly like to understand. Because the one thing that Dr. Ambedkar is very, very clear about in his ideas about the concept of Pakistan is that Pakistan as a state will never be able to do justice to the Dalits in Hindus. And he was very, very clear about the fact that the Dalits will be among the first people to be affected as a consequence of the two nation theory if India were not to protect them. For the simple reason that, in the point of view of, let's say, the Pakistani mindset, the Dalit Hindu is perhaps the lowest common denominator, and therefore he must be converted under any circumstances. And if he does not convert, he does not have a right to live. In fact, I think out of the three categories of Muslims that they have as part of their definition, one is the Arab Hindu, or sorry, the Arab Muslim. The other is the convert to Islam from the so-called Savarnas of the Hindu community. The third is the convert from the SC, STs, and the OBCs of the Hindu community to Islam. And that particular category or strata of the Muslim community, according to him, does not deserve the same level of respect, or does not get the same level of respect as the Arab Muslim. So these are his readings of how, let's say, there is a caste structure or a hierarchical structure within the idea of Pakistan itself. I'm not saying that he is entirely right or he is entirely wrong. But the one thing that must be drawn from his approach is the fearlessness in his speech, the fearlessness in his examination of facts, his political incorrectness, and his tendency to call a spade, because he had the exact opposite in Mr. Gandhi, who was willing to compromise on logic, facts, reason, and whatnot under the sun, and political realities and social realities and religious realities, all under the altar of what we know as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and God knows what not, Sarvadharma Sambhava and all that. Okay, you cannot have peace or brotherhood or harmony at the expense of the truth. You will need to speak the truth, you will need to confront it, and you will need to deal with it, and you'll have to find ways of addressing it, as opposed to behaving like an ostrich with your head buried in the sand.